problem that we found with the number of illegal immigrants coming into the States is drug trafficking. And of course, this has a negative impact on American society with the violence and other things that can come along with it. There is evidence that supports our position on the matter. In 2007, 850,000 people were arrested for attempting to enter the country illegally. However, the federal government estimates that only 10 to 20% of that number are actually captured. There could be as many as 4 million undocumented immigrants entering the U.S. every year. It is also estimated that almost 90% of illegal drugs coming into the States are from Mexico, and most of those drugs coming in from Mexico are smuggled in by illegal immigrants. In 2005, 1.13 million pounds of cocaine and 6.9 million pounds of marijuana was seized. Those drugs had an estimated street value of about $80 billion. Federal law enforcement officials estimate that only about 20% of drugs coming in are actually seized, meaning that the majority of those drugs are coming in with illegal immigrants who are not caught. In 2016, 589,000 kilograms of marijuana, meth, cocaine, and heroin were seized. Converted to pounds, that is about 1.3 million pounds. A little less than half of that number was seized at Southwest ports of entry alone. As you can see, 11 years later, that amount has decreased since the 2016 number is a combination of several different drugs. However, drug trafficking is still a problem that is currently being faced, and we have to remember that there is a large number that we do not even know about. Two potential sources to the problem of drug trafficking have been identified. First, there is an obligation to drug trafficking organizations, or D2Os. Since most of the drugs coming into the U.S. illegally come from Mexico, my primary focus is going to be on the country as a source of the problem. DTOs have been in operation in Mexico for over a century, and they supply and distribute to many countries. Just like any other business, they will do what is necessary to maximize their profits. The drugs are worth a lot more in the United States, which is why the U.S. is Mexico's primary customer, as you can say. The DTOs are increasingly gaining control of the U.S. retail-level distribution through alliances with gangs here in the U.S. However, the violence remains mostly in Mexico. DTOs use bribery and violence together to ensure the employees are aware of their obligation to the organization. Violence is primarily used to discipline the employees and force them to make sales, limit the entry of competitors, and coerce. This is a source because the employees are pretty much forced to smuggle drugs into the U.S. once they have joined the cartel. It is very difficult for the employees to get out of work or to get out of the organization once they are in it. It is also common for employees to be killed if they try to do so. Next is the corruption of the Mexican government. The political parties and state governments remained closed off and corrupt. A World Values Survey found that just 11% of Mexicans stated that they can trust others from their country. This leads to the conclusion that some dishonest or fraudulent activity is occurring. Under President Enrique Peña Nieto, in 2017, the homicide rate reached 26 per 100,000 people, which is the highest it has ever been. More than 135,000 people have been killed in Mexico since 2012. Most of these killings are tied to the drug wars. Robberies are also on the rise, increasing 180% in just 2 years. Mexicans no longer feel safe in their own homes. Violence is occurring everywhere around them. But in Colombia, the state only spends 0.9% of GDP on public safety. The safety they do have is not sufficient. The police may be undereducated, underpaid, or corrupt. All of the violence from the cartel is one of the lead causes of death in Mexico, while drug abuse is one of the leading causes of death in the U.S. Therefore, Mexicans are killing each other in order to sell their drugs to Americans, and which will cause them to kill themselves. Two possible solutions to the problem of drug trafficking will be identified. First, there should be an improvement to border security. Primarily, the main ports of entry need to be focused on. Investing in these areas could help to solve the drug trafficking problem. U.S. Custom and Border Protection statistics show that 81% of drugs were seized at the southwest border between 2012 and 2016. That 81% was seized at the ports of entry alone. Less than 20% of drugs were seized between the ports of entry. So by investing in the ports of entry and improving the infrastructure and security there, the percentage of drugs seized could be even more. Although 20% of drugs were seized between the ports of entry, investments in these areas will not assist much in stopping illegal drugs from entering the country. Ultimately, 100% of drugs are not going to be intercepted no matter what you do. Security itself can be improved through the use of body-worn cameras or plants that the security can hide behind. The other solution to this issue is to decriminalize the use of some drugs. In 2010, a study proved that 40 to 67% of marijuana consumption in the U.S. came from Mexico alone. Since then, most of states in the U.S. have either decriminalized, made medical, or legalized the use of marijuana. This has led the illegal flow of marijuana through the border to decrease. The average Border Patrol agent confiscated 78% less marijuana in 2018 than in 2013. Similarly to marijuana, if other drugs that illegal immigrants are smuggling over were decriminalized, those consumers would rely less on drugs from Mexico and more on the states. Therefore, the results would be similar to what we are seeing with marijuana, and less drugs would be coming across the border illegally.
I'll be taking a look at our two proposed solutions, looking at them a little bit more in depth, and then I'll move on to our recommended solution, and I'll also try to break that down a little bit more thoroughly as well. So our first proposed solution was an increase in border security. While this increase in border security is feasible and it's already being utilized currently, it comes with its own issues, and it comes with varying results. For example, tightening down border crossings and ports of entry, and checking individuals and individuals' belongings and their vehicles, and making sure that they have the right credentials. This is all effective if that is the method that the people are using to come into the United States illegally. There are other methods. For example, tunnels, which are used extensively by cartels for smuggling drugs. There are underground tunnels with railroad systems that can haul like literal tons of the weight, tons of drugs into the United States. These are obscured by industrial areas where there are a lot of warehouses and things like that. So that provides a huge issue with only securing legitimate crossings and legitimate access points into the United States. In addition, the open ocean is one way that individuals could come into the United States illegally. Obviously, with the vast amount of coastline, it's extremely difficult to build up the manpower and the money and all of the things that come with surveying huge stretches of coastline and huge stretches of open ocean. And in addition, just the sheer number of people that we're talking about here, even with the tightest security on who is coming through these legitimate border crossings, inevitably there are people that are going to kind of fall through the cracks or evade detection. So while it can be effective, as more people attempt to get into the country, it becomes less and less effective. Next, I'll be presenting our second proposed solution, which is our recommended solution. That solution is the decriminalization of the key narcotics which fund the cartel's illegal activity. That illegal activity includes the drug trafficking loop. So obviously, the more money they make, the more they can put back into that entire cycle. Human trafficking, kidnapping, just things of that sort. I'll also explain how decriminalizing these drugs can be a solution for the illegal immigration problem that is plaguing the United States.